Okay. Hi, I'm Claire Sullivan. I'm the acting chair for the Planning Commission, and this is the 22nd of March, and we're having a joint work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Flood Board. And I'm going to ask people to go around the room and introduce themselves, and make it a lot easier for everybody. So we'll start right over here.
Vanessa Bergen, Commissioner.
Claire Sullivan, Commissioner.
Victoria Monaco, Commissioner.
Brett Winters, Commissioner.
Jamie Finn Katuchik.
Daniel Charbonneau, Commissioner.
David Heddick, Chair, Flood Board.
Stephen Taylor, Flood Board.
Troy Staggs, Commissioner.
Dwayne Atwood, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Board.
Bob Reisner, Member, Flood Board.
And I'm Stephanie Presley. I'm the Flood Service Area Program Lead. For those of you who were here last March, we did a hazards presentation. And tonight we're going to be working on our hazard mitigation plan. So I'm going to reduce. What's that?
Introduce Mark and Ed.
Oh, sorry. Online. Can you introduce yourself, Ed and Mark?
Ed Mark Hansen with the Flood Board.
Let me change our audio so we can hear you. And joining us is Paul McBride. He is from the Borough Office of Emergency Management, and he's a program manager, is that right? So he'll be joining us tonight as well. So everybody can see. I'm going to minimize the people that are on Zoom. If you guys want to speak up or have questions, if you could chat with Heather, she can monitor the chat and let us know if you had questions or wanted to speak up. So tonight we're going to complete our annual review of our hazard mitigation plan. This is going to be new for quite a few of you. 6 o'clock. In the fire station, we actually get to listen to the call at 6 o'clock, so we usually like to delay our meeting. So we'll be covering a lot of information about hazard mitigation, but you guys will be seeing this again and again, so you don't feel like you need to learn everything tonight. Last year, during our joint work session, we covered all the hazards in our community. So we included the presentation in the mail out or the email that went out. And we're not going to go through it all tonight. We're going to do it really quickly. All of this information is excerpts taken from your hazard mitigation plan. So in our community, we're susceptible to many different hazards. We have a lot of mitigation work that we need to do throughout the year. The flood service area focuses in on flood, ground failure, erosion, tsunami, coastal storm surge, and then the city focuses in on some of the other ones, as well as flooding, erosion, and coastal storm surge. Just quickly, we're in an Alaskan community. We're in one of the world's most seismically active zones. We have very steep canyons with watersheds and alluvial fans. We're surrounded by tall, glaciated mountains. We have a deep bay off the Gulf of Alaska. We have great northern storm events. Happy spring, everybody. I think we might be getting closer to the end of winter storms. We're in proximity to a long chain of active volcanoes. And we're surrounded by forests with a thriving marine cargo, fuel, and other industries. So some may say there's little we can do about all these hazards. Can't control Mother Nature, why worry about these things? So question to you all, get you warmed up. Why do we identify and study and model these hazards? And why do we have a hazard mitigation plan? Don't be shy.
Well, I think you're probably wanting to be able to protect people in anticipation of something happening, either move people to high ground or to evacuate them to another area of some sort, and maybe not build on some of those areas that might be problematic.
Yep. Other thoughts? Very briefly.
Okay, our imminent issues policy, which was enacted just a few years ago, allowed our flood board to get out there on a levee or a dike if it was starting to breach. We then had the policy that was correct for the government for us to go in there with a limited budget and go in there and take care of the problem before the levee or dike gave. This prevented several breakouts that would have caused a larger event that would have forced the Office of Emergency Management to come from Soldotna spending in excess of $300,000 to fix the emergency. By us going in there, we're generally under 20,000, sometimes as high as 30,000, depending on the number of breaks.
Thanks, Bob. So the flood board mission is actually mitigation. So we don't usually deal with emergency response, but we do get out there and try to prevent emergencies from happening. So flood board members are really familiar with hazard mitigation planning. And Claire's correct, we can do something about these hazards. We can be prepared, pack our emergency kits in case of avalanche, cuts off the community for multiple days, or wildfire threatens our neighborhoods. We can educate people on when they need to evacuate following an earthquake, or where they need to go to get out of town for a potential tsunami wave. We can have building codes that keep houses from falling down in an earthquake or under heavy snow loads. We can keep people from building in high flood hazard areas or require structures to be built to withstand hydrostatic pressures. We can plan for development and to occur in neighborhoods that are reasonably safe from hazard areas, or we can fund programs that actually remove structures from known high hazard areas. So why do you guys think hazard mitigation planning is important to this group of people in the room? Some of you commissioners are pretty new, but maybe some of you have been here a little while. What kind of plans do you guys work on? What does planning and zoning do?
We have the power to rezone things.
Mm-hmm.
I think also in putting in whether it's, even you laying out utilities or putting homes in certain areas, in a variety of areas like this, you don't want to place something in an area that potentially is, if like you get an alluvial plain or something shifts or anything like this, if it's not suitable for it, I think that probably would support, what we would look at.
Yeah, definitely. So for the service area, we deal with planning, protection, and mitigation. We focus in on flooding, riverine, coastal flooding, ground failure and erosion, and tsunami or siege. And you guys look at land use plans, you rezone, you look at new plats. We should have plats that mark our hazard areas, so they're very clear when we're dealing with new plats. FEMA also requires us to have a plan. So most state and federal funding will ask how a grant proposal fits into our hazard mitigation plan. It's one of their favorite questions. So being able to answer that as we seek mitigation funding is important. So tonight we're going to talk about our mitigation action plan. I'm going to share my new screen. All right. And Heather, anything from those online?
Not yet,
Okay.
except Mark said he feels minimized.
He feels minimized. I bet you I could fit him in, let's see. We usually bring people else. Where did it go? Fun with technology. All right, Mark. Both of these plans read almost identical because we had the same planning teams, we had the same state-funded contractor to assist us with writing that
Recording
plan.
in progress.
They kicked us off for saying.
All right, so everybody online should be able to see that again. Yes. This is the Stewart Bear Creek Flood Service Area 2019 update 5 years ago. So we went from that 330-page plan to 33, I believe. So FEMA requires communities to update their plan every 5 years. In 2018, the borough encouraged all our communities to update along the same timeline to make it easy for everybody, because we do have a lot of small communities and small planning teams. Within Seward, we have requested that the state fund a multi-jurisdictional plan that would include the city, Cooperative, and the flood service area. For some reason, the state wasn't agreeable to that idea at the time, and we all ended up working on 2 separate plans. The flood board also ended up working on the review of the flood section of the borough's plan. So we spent a lot of months and a lot of joint work sessions looking at mitigation. So we learned a lot of lessons during that 5-year update, and we will hopefully be able to make this next planning process much simpler. So plans don't need to be 300 pages, as I just showed you. We don't have to have 66 action items to go through tonight. That's probably more than a community can address in 5 years. And our action items don't have to be project specific. They can be very generalized. And so I'll point out some examples of that. So I did include quite a bit of we included 2 sections. So we included the planning section, and then we included the mitigation sections. I think both of our big plans have 7 sections. We're not going to go through every page. I kind of picked and choose little excerpts from each. But I thought you might be interested in kind of what that process is like and how we determine what to focus our resources and time on. So one of the lessons we learned from our previous process is that annual maintenance will make this next 5-year update much simpler. So the city and the flood service area, staff met 3 different times in November and December. We went over the plan, we provided some updates, we went through the annual review questionnaire, we provided some progress reports on finished items or action items that are still ongoing. And so this annual review questionnaire is very helpful. It kind of gets us kicked off with, the planning process, what can we do better? So we had the Alaska Railroad and State DOT attend one of our meetings and give input on their mitigation planning. And you'll find as we go through this that cooperative projects are essential in hazard mitigation. We have Bear Creek, we have Seward, we have Lowell Point, we have Cooperative, we have the borough that helps. I mean, everybody is working together. DOT is important for mitigation and flooding, and railroad is important for mitigation and flooding as well. So everybody needs to work together. One of the things we learned is that next year, instead of going line item by line item, we're going to have each responsible person, department, entity provide a progress report prior to us going through our annual review. So progress reports will come in, and then we'll hold one annual meeting to review the plan. We may ask this group to do a little bit of work on different sections of the plan during the next 2 years to help make our 5-year update much simpler. So last year we discussed hazards in our area, and each year we want to know if we've had any disasters, if there's any studies or new information to assist with our hazard mitigation planning. Some of you may remember October 2020, we had a flood event. I don't believe we've had any coastal storm events during that time period, but that is often one that we have in the winter time. Is there anything that we haven't addressed? We didn't think so. We felt like we pretty much covered most of the hazards pretty well. And then really important to hazard mitigation planning, are there any additional maps, new studies, information available that we need to take a look at that will help to inform our mitigation planning? So we did have, the flood board had a water resource engineer do some flood hazard analysis in 3 neighborhoods out in Bear Creek. That was Old Exit Glacier, Old Mill, and Nash Woods. And then in December, some of you might have attended the presentation on the draft Tsunami Inundation Map that's been rolled out. It's still in draft form. We're waiting on kind of peer review and final report to come out in August. So we know that there's going to be some planning around tsunamis coming up. We want to take a look at our vulnerabilities. So do we have any critical facilities, infrastructure that we need to add? One of the questions I want to ask this group is, can you think of any development patterns or changes that may impact hazard mitigation planning? Do we have any replats, rezoning, anything like that going on in recent year?
We have some internal stuff in town, but nothing significant that I know Jason would probably know better than I would, the things that we were looking at for rezone. But, smaller things for, Katuchik going in, wanting to get, the health place in town and a few other places, but I don't recall anything significant.
Yeah, so that's something we want to be thinking about though as we're going through our normal processes, is considering how those new patterns of development might impact those hazards or vice versa. So we're going to think about our mitigation strategies for the rest of tonight. I'm going to try and get you guys out of here by 7:30, so we'll go through stuff quickly. Feel free to stop me, ask questions. We hopefully will have answers for you, and if we don't, then we'll cover it next time.
Got a quick question. How far out what is your area of responsibility in terms of just Seward, Bear Creek? How far out?
Oh, good question.
do you cover?
Yeah. So the flood service area, the citizens voted on it in 2003, and we cover from south of Low Point all the way north of Bear Lake. So the service area encompasses the city with the exception of a very small section on the other side of the bay, and taxpayers pay a mill rate, and we do cooperative projects within the city, as well as do work outside of the city. So we end up cooperating, and part of our mission is to not duplicate mitigation efforts, to cooperate with multiple agencies. It's part of my job description, is to make sure we're reaching out to all the different agencies that might need to be involved. Thank you for coming to me. And so the flood service area really focuses in on mitigation planning, and the only way we get those long-term mitigation goals accomplished is by cooperating with other agencies, seeking grant funding and through various sources. Answer your question, Claire?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So we'll answer a few of these questions tonight. Are our goals still applicable? Should we have any new action items added? I think this is more likely to be our next meeting. Do existing mitigation actions listed need to be reprioritized? And do we still have the resources available to accomplish what's on our mitigation action plan? So our planning team actually includes all of you. I think we got everybody on there. Let me know if we spelled your name wrong. We've got a couple of vacancies that'll get filled in there. We had quite a few new staff members. There we go. Yep. So quite a bit of this planning team is new to this process. So hopefully quite a few of us will be around when we do the 5-year update, and we can remember the work that we've done. I will reach out to you tomorrow and find out the names of the two people on this list that need to be on the list and what your job titles are.
Okay. It might just be one.
It might just be you, so. So part of the planning process is to review different documents. So we've got our mitigation plans, comp plans, municipal lands inventories, zoning maps, various studies that have been updated for, we find valuable for hazard mitigation. So are there any updates to this table that we know of? Have you guys updated any of these plans? I think 2033. I don't think this one's been updated recently, the comp plan.
No, the comp plan is not. We are in the process of kind of doing a reformat and like major deep update that we'll give back to them for the municipal lands inventory and management plan. And the fact that we're selling or in the process of developing a lot of lands as well, which is another reason for kind of the shuffle on that. So that one will be probably done by the end of the summer.
Great, okay. Zoning map? Is that still from 2016?
Yeah, I mean, there's been zoning changes since then, but it's just a continuous update as when those ordinances are approved.
We do know we've had quite a few additional studies. Like I said, we've got a new Tsunami Inundation Map that'll get rolled out later this year. The Army Corps completed a Japanese Creek feasibility study, so we've got a lot of information about the Japanese Creek alluvial fan, which is the northern half of the city. The Army Corps also completed the Lowell Canyon Creek feasibility study, so we'll give you a wonderful update if you haven't heard about our Army Corps project that got funded. Everybody should be super excited. That's been a #1 priority for a long time. So yeah, like I said, as we look at the land management future needs, we want to know where our high hazard areas are, and these various plans should complement one another. Makes it a lot easier when you go to update things. So integrating the hazard mitigation plan into our other planning processes, such as reviewing our regulatory tools. So if we're working on a code revision, how can we use this to mitigate hazards? And we've recommitted to reviewing our annual plan. The city and the flood service area meet monthly. Sometimes we get joined by other agencies. And we will be continuing to discuss mitigation projects and planning during those monthly meetings. So tonight we're reviewing the plan. This is the section here that tells us what we need to do. We have several progress reports that were included in your packet from various departments on specific action items. There has been a turnover of staffing since this was developed, so we didn't have all of the information available, but everybody did their best to kind of do their research and give you what we had. All right. So the real reason we do the plan is to develop mitigation strategies. What do we need to do about all these hazards? So the service area and city action plans, like I said, are basically the same. The service area is focusing in on 4 different hazards. The city includes all the others. And during the 5-year update, we reviewed those through a few different joint work sessions. Many of those were carried over from the city's 2010 legacy plan. And as we were going through this review process with staff, we found that some of those were pretty outdated, or they had been completed, or they needed to be kind of reworded to have a project that better fit what we were looking to accomplish. So we have regulatory tools to mitigate hazards. I know the borough's wildfire protection plan just got a revamp following the Swan Lake fire. Are there any new updates to any of these plans? I'm kind of wondering if we've got building code or zoning ordinances that have happened in the last year and a half. No?
Well, I mean, just zoning ordinances as in individual properties.
Okay. No big changes to sections of the code.
Not regarding zoning, yeah.
So we do have some local specialists, so we have access to specialists, we have access to financial resources, federal funding programs are available. You know, we can levy taxes, we can, you know, apply to different block grants. Katuchik has the opportunity to apply to a couple of other grants. We have federal mitigation dollars. Some of these have changed. The federal programs for flood mitigation and hazard mitigation have been revamped recently. We've got building resilient infrastructure and communities, which is a new hazard mitigation grant that coastal communities should really be looking at. So there have been some changes to these mitigation grant funding. Currently, there's also the Infrastructure and Investing in Jobs Act, where communities will be able to put in for grant funding through the state capital project request. So I know the borough and the city have been working on quite a few of those, looking at the infrastructure bill. All right, so these are our hazards that we're dealing with. And these are our mitigation goals. So we had developed 3 different kind of multi-hazard goals. The first around funding, planning, outreach activities. The second about cross-referencing and integrating mitigation into our planning mechanisms and projects. The third, construction activities that avoid potential losses and damages from hazards. And then we have the natural hazards specific. We're basically looking to reduce vulnerability, damages, losses for each of the natural hazards. And then also our technological hazards, which would be like fuel and what's the other one? The seafood plants have, I'm not going to think of it. That was thank you. So they have to have hazard plans in case there was some sort of spill, that type of thing. So, are there any changes? Are these goals still applicable for what the community wants to be accomplishing? Simple question. It's not very good. It's a very quiet group tonight. Okay, so we'll spend some time during our 5-year update evaluating potential mitigation action items. We will be using the stability criteria as we go through and evaluate. So if we don't have the resources, we don't have the funding, if we don't have a champion, if we don't have people that are willing to do the work, if it's environmentally unfriendly, we don't have the political support, there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't want to work or spend our time and resources on a mitigation action, right? So mitigation action steps should include these criteria, right? We should have a champion working for something. We should know how we're gonna fund it. We should have the staffing to do the project management. All of those questions have to go into thinking about what are we gonna work on, right?
I have a quick question. This is, it sounds like a lot of this is grant driven. Are there grant writers dedicated? I'm assuming there are, but who are those that do that?
That's a very good question. From the city, Jason, do you want to give the answer to that one?
As far as city grants
You guys
goes.
have R&M.
Yeah, we have, like, our grants are usually tied to like projects that we're doing, and so we, like, a lot of our engineering groups in the last so many years, they got really smart and they created grant departments. So that way they didn't have to like have this grant and then have this engineering group, and the engineering group grant writer kept having to talk back and forth to figure out like what's in the reporting, and it just created this giant circle. And so now with the engineering group that the city of Seward has been primarily working with over the years, they have a grant department. And so they kind of know the city really well, and they know the projects we need to do. They know our demographics and all the kind of requirements around that. And so they can pretty easily now say, hey, we have found these grants that might be applicable to this, and if you get another partner, you could do this, or you don't meet the requirements because we know your community in this area. And so, yeah, so I think that there's those grants, and then I think there's also kind of like federal grants that we are applied for kind of outside of some of that type of work that we use lobbyists for, you know, capital improvement projects, that type of thing as well that we look at, so.
Stephanie, I have a question. Are all the communities on the peninsula on the same schedule for providing their plans to the borough?
We're all pretty close. I think within a year. It kind of depended on the finalization, FEMA approval, and when the community adopted the plan. But I think we're all pretty close. And then Claire, to go back to your question, the flood service area is a service area of the Kenai Peninsula Borough. So we're borough employees. The borough has a grants and community fiscal projects manager. And so we are very lucky to have purchasing and contracting department that can work up, you know, cost estimates for projects. And then, you know, whatever department, like myself, will do a benefit cost analysis if it's a federal grant. And then, you know, we have our grants manager that will help us put that package all together to submit it. Like Jason was saying, there's lots of different funding sources. So like the state capital project requests, those are kind of different. We'll need to do a bit of a grant application, but it's not the big federal dollar FEMA grant application for hazard mitigation. So it depends on who needs to be involved and how large of a grant it is. There's some grants out there that are 11 pages. You can have one person review it. You have finance stamp it, put a signature on it, and send it off. And so sometimes, you know, Heather and I will put together a grant application for something small. So it just depends, but on what the funding source is. Yeah. But it takes usually quite a few people involved from different departments to get a good grant application out.
I would think so, yeah.
So, and I'll be curious, you know, how does the state structure the new infrastructure funding, considering that it's supposed to be a Jobs Act, we're supposed to be getting that money to communities quickly. I'll be curious to see like how detailed do those grant applications need to be for this. So let's hope they're those 11 pages. All right. And Mark and Ed and Paul and everybody online, I'm sorry, we're going to have to minimize you so we can see the whole mitigation action plan. Feel free to read out the comments on that. There's no one yet. All right, we are doing good on time. So the mitigation action team, or the mitigation planning team went through the action plan item by item. We provided some revisions, some progress reports. We'll be going in detail over this mitigation action plan in the next couple of years. So I'm going to try and go through these somewhat briefly. We'll complete a quick review. Some of the lessons that we learned for the next update, be more general. Some of these were very specific items. You know, for example, we have like every kind of education piece listed out here item by item. We don't need to be that specific in our mitigation action items. So, is it necessary to include this many action items? Like, I think when we reviewed this, we had like 90 that we actually reviewed, and we eliminated quite a few of them, and we ended up with, I think it's 66. I didn't actually count. So is it necessary? Do we have the resources to accomplish these action items in the next 5 years? Maybe some of them get put on hold, maybe they get added 3 years from now and we're doing really good, we got a whole bunch of grant funding and we have other, resources available to keep working on something. So, multi-hazard, number 1, is funding, planning, outreach activities to educate and promote recognizing and mitigating natural and man-made hazards. So I'm going to go through these. We have them all identified by an action ID with the goal being to reduce this multi-hazard. So multi-hazard 1.1. I'm not going to read these all. Do you guys want me to make them bigger so you can see them back there? Dave, can you see? Yeah. How about you, Stephen? You've got it on your pad, so. Okay. I can enlarge it if anybody needs. So the community currently has several grant application and capital project requests to the state. So grant funding, like we just talked about, is something that's constantly, either being sought or a grant application is being written. Multi-hazard 1.2. So we do an annual spring permitting and agency information day. That's coming up on April 26th. It's a Tuesday. We invite all of the regulatory agencies, all of the agencies that might have a project in the area down to the Seward Library. So people in Seward can get some face time with these people that are out in Anchorage or the other side of the peninsula. Talk about your projects, ask questions about anything under the sun. So I think we're going to have people from the state, Fish and Game, DNR. We'll have the feds here, so the Army Corps always comes down. We'll have DOT here. Who else is coming? The city of Seward will definitely be in attendance.
The railroad.
Huh? Railroad, yeah. So that's usually our big public outreach each spring. It's timed, of course, so people can get a start on permitting for their early spring projects, but you're welcome to come down or have your friends come down and just ask random questions from the agencies. It's a good opportunity to kind of get some face time with some of those agencies. Multi-hazard 1.3. This was the first thing we did when we started having meetings in November. We formalized our hazard mitigation planning team. Like I said, it's going to be the staff that attends our monthly meetings, and then maybe once or twice a year we'll be coming back to these two bodies to work on different sections of hazard mitigation planning. Multi-hazard 1.4, tabletop exercises. It's important to kind of think ahead, and so our next emergency tabletop exercise is going to be held in July. Multi-hazard 1.5. So mapping is very important for mitigation. We updated mapping in 3 Bear Creek neighborhoods. We're hoping to complete an updated map for the Japanese alluvial fan, the northern section of the city. We collected new LiDAR data, and I think we have an ordinance next Tuesday, City Council, to redirect some of those funding so we can get some hazard mitigation mapping and work on some design plans for Japanese Creek alluvial fans. We also send out email to our local realtors. We try during the month of April when we're advertising for permitting day to let them know, how do they look at our parcel viewer, which has hazard mapping on it. How do they find that kind of information so they can provide that to people who might be looking for property or structures within our service Multihazard 1.6, this one has been brought forward from the 2010, working with FEMA to obtain the latest NFIP scheduling workshops. So NFIP stands for National Flood Insurance Program. Both the borough and the city of Seward are participants in the National Flood Insurance Program. So having FEMA provide us with information on the changes. Congress loves to change the National Flood Insurance Program. So almost every year we have some big change. The most recent change probably is to what they're now calling risk rating 2.0, and it's a change in how they are determining flood insurance premiums. I'm not going to tell you anything more. You can give me a call, Brock, if you really want to know about risk rating. Oh, and staff did have a really fun training today with FEMA for about 4 hours. They're in town. They're actually in Kenai right now, so Kenai's getting a new map. Multihazard 1.6, this is an example of a very specific wording that we're going to want to make much more general if it's included in our next update. So this one again was brought forward from 2010. Like I said, we learned a lot of lessons.
1.6 or 1.7?
1.7. 1.6 was the National Flood Insurance Program, making sure FEMA's let us know all the changes. Do you guys include the news from Region 10 in your packets for the Planning and Zoning Commissioners? I know they used to at one point in time.
Yeah, I don't believe so. Yeah.
We'll send it your way if we think there's anything important.
Yeah.
Number 1.8. So we do have a new Tsunami Inundation Map. I've already said this. We expect that to be finalized in August, and we'll be working on mitigation action items in the coming months. 1.9, let's see, this was a very interesting one that we really couldn't figure out what this task actually meant or how it was related to mitigation. So we just recommended that we delete this. It was carried forward from 2010 and none of us were around then, so this is one that we could actually remove. Multihazard 110 was completed. This is radios basically that were distributed some time ago. All right, multihazard number 2 is to cross-reference and integrate mitigation goals and actions with planning mechanisms and projects. So we've been talking about the importance of all the work that we do and how cross-referencing is important. So 2.1 is just an ongoing. We're always going to be looking at new plans and how we can incorporate all the other plans and information into those. 2.2 is about our cooperative relationship between the flood service area and the city, so we're not duplicating hazard mitigation efforts. I might suggest a reword that instead of establishing a cooperative relationship, that we maintain the cooperative relationship that we've had going on for some years. 2.3 has been completed. There is an assessment done on Lowell Point Road. A couple of the different projects were related to the Lowell Point Road work, so this one's been completed. 2.4, this is an ongoing, basically continue to develop and incorporate and enforce building ordinances so people can survive hazards and ensure occupant safety. I think that one will probably stay on there for many years now. 2.5, this may be an upcoming item. So once again, this is the National Flood Insurance Program. They have a community rating system that allows the community to do additional work to provide a slight discount for flood insurance premiums for your residents. So more information than you actually want to know. But what might be coming up in the future is FEMA's going to require communities in the community rating system to change their floodplain code to include what we call freeboard above base flood elevation. Freeboard means here's where we're expecting the floodwaters to be. We're going to add a foot, and your first floor of your structure needs to be that high. So I don't know the exact timeline as to when FEMA is going to require communities to change their floodplain code to include that 1 foot of freeboard, but I would imagine that you guys may be reviewing the floodplain code in the next couple of years. Multi-hazard 2.6, again, this may be an upcoming action item. It's looking at identifying avalanche areas. I might change that to landslide areas. And we've been talking with USGS about a potential partnership project to look at collecting new LiDAR data, which is flown from an airplane. It's a light imaging and detection radar that provides us with a digital elevation model. So we actually get bare earth model that we can see what's going on with all the structures and the vegetation wiped away. If we're able to partner with federal agencies and actually collect all of the alpine reaches, so we want to get all the way up to the ridge tops and collect the entire watersheds and all of our mountainsides, we might be able to have a group look at landslide analyses. So again, identifying those avalanche areas and having more important information like Wolf Point Road, we have a landslide analysis that was recently done there, and that's important information to know. 2.7, we recommend deleting this. This is about emergency operations plan. Emergency operations are separate from mitigation. So mitigation action takes place before and after an emergency event, and those emergency operations should be a separate plan that's specific to emergencies. So I recommend deleting that one. All right, our third multi-hazard is construction activities that mitigate, either avoid or reduce potential losses and damages from hazards. So relocating or acquiring structures and properties from hazard-prone areas. So we have been doing some planning on this item with the Salmon Creek Conservation Area that's basically outside of town. So we might be doing some kind of prioritization around removing structures from the high velocity floodplain areas or the floodway areas. 3.2, we do have some projects completed that utility headers were armored. We've got out Snow River, and as you're passing the big bridge, there was a big project to armor the telephone poles that are there. And then we had another project a couple summers ago out Nash Road. So it's kind of a no-name creek. You pass Sawmill Creek at mile 2. And then the next creek, some people will call it a Fognack Creek. The channel had migrated and was eroding the bank and was getting really close to that utility pole, so the city did an armory project there as well. 3.3 has been completed. This was a generator for AvTech. 3.4, this one's kind of in progress. We do drainage analyses kind of as we're able to. So we did have some work as far as analyses done on Spruce Creek when we were looking at the 3 neighborhoods outside of town, and they used Spruce Creek because we have the longest amount of data for Spruce Creek to do some regression equations and some flow capacity analyses. Spruce Creek in the next couple of years is going to get added to the flood board's been working on a sediment management and maintenance program. So right now we have 5 sites that are almost set up and ready to go. We've been doing some pilot projects, and Spruce Creek we would anticipate will be added to that sediment management maintenance program probably 2 years out. So that would include kind of that sedimentation rates. We'll do some analyses around that. On Scheffler Creek, we just collected LiDAR data of the entire alluvial fan, and we will hopefully be going out to work with the water resource engineer to do some analyses around all of the alluvial fan, which will probably include Scheffler Creek. Again, 3.5 is all about the Emergency Operations Center. We recommend this get deleted. 3.6, I don't think any action has been done on this item. This is about developing vegetation for slope stabilization. 3.7 has been completed. This is a kind of evacuation trail that bypasses the Seward Cove Harbor. Uh, 3.8, part of this has been completed. The flood board and the Parks and Rec department worked on a couple of riprap armoring the waterfront from coastal erosion, so that's been completed. There is still kind of the thought that implementing a regenerative program for beach grass or some sort of stabilization along the waterfront there would help to stabilize during coastal storm events. 3.9, this is kind of an ongoing, really having an engineer available that could inspect our infrastructure would be valuable. So this is kind of one resource that our community might be lacking, that we might want to go out to contract, or having somebody that can come in and actually inspect and then provide us with information on those critical facilities and infrastructure. The state does have a bridge inspector that comes down every 2 years and inspects all of our bridges, so we do get a bridge report every 2 years. 3.10, I believe, has been completed. This was identifying those building sites, kind of Forest Acres and Dick Graff Road. I believe that's been accomplished.
Stephanie, quick question.
Yeah.
From the bridge inspectors, is that what develops the bridge priorities for the borough for the replacement? Because I know there's a number that are going to be happening on our side, right?
Yeah, the road service area put in for funding for, it was 12 or 13, Cindy provided a report last night. 7 of those bridges are within the service area borough bridges. And so those will be prioritized based on the state inspection. I think that probably the Forest Road Bridge out the Old Mill subdivision is probably one of the highest ones because it's one of our most responded to sites. I know Spruce Creek out Mill Point Road is one of the bridges on that priority list. So yeah, they'll have those, ranked based on that inspection. 311, this is another area where it'd be very valuable to have the Army Corps of Engineers or some other engineer that knows, structural levees, be able to come down and do an assessment and provide us with information very specific to what needs to be done with our levees. Quite a few of our levees, Spruce Creek, the top of Japanese Creek, 4th of July, I believe, were built following the 1986 event. So they've been there a long time. They've got some deferred maintenance that needs to happen. There's a lot of vegetation that are growing on those armored levees. So that would be something that we probably don't have the resources here in town to do besides going and looking and be like, yeah, hey, there's geotech fabric you can see right there, or that rock fell down. Having an engineer that could actually give us an assessment and provide us with the information of what needs to happen on those levees would be very valuable. Uh, 312 and 313 have been completed. The Lowell Canyon outfall, the sediment that comes out of the outfall that has to be removed basically during flood events, the permits have been obtained. And again, the waterfront, we have done armored rock along the like the play area there. 314 Little Point Road has been completed. It's very lovely, I think. I wonder if anybody lives out that way. It was nice to see that get done. 315, we did have a joint work session with the city council regarding Resurrection River mitigation. There's been no real action at this time. I think we're kind of waiting on DOT to finish the Stewart Airport project. And then 316, the electrical general manager, Rob Montgomery, preferred to reword this for a project that was kind of more applicable to what we wanted to accomplish. So he provided us with some new wording, and that project has been completed. That's all right, and then moving on to natural hazards. We're doing really good. We've got 5 minutes to 7. We'll be able to get through all. EQ is earthquake, so 4.1. This is another one where we simply don't have the resource here in town. We need to bring an engineer to come out and really look at our public facilities and determine what retrofits needed to happen. Or we could just build new buildings and actually, build them to withstand hazard. Earthquake 4.2. This is one that everybody should go home this weekend. Get your TV, your bookshelves, any of that heavy furniture that's going to fall off the wall, and screw it into the studs, because you don't want those heavy things falling off onto you. And I love how this is worded: small children, elderly, and pets. Don't strap it to the wall. Earthquake 4.3, I believe the school district completed assessments at the schools following the November 18 earthquake. Do you know if they did that?
I believe so.
I believe they did, because
Yeah.
they needed to get reimbursed for any work that needed to be done. So.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was done to any of the city buildings or other locations, but I know following the November earthquake, there were a lot of assessments that were completed. All right, moving on to flooding. The flood board kind of looks at mitigation action a little bit differently, and we prioritize projects annually. So we have a list of projects prioritized, usually 6 or 7. That we're working on. Some of them are like long-term mitigation planning, some of them might just be in a planning phase. So most of our priority projects will fit under several different action items. We usually, they'll fit under 4 or 5 depending on what the project is. So I'll go through these quickly. Progress reports have been provided in your packet if you actually want more information on any of these. So flooding 5.1, and I should add that flood board members, if you're looking at our mitigation action plan, these numbers are different from these numbers here. So 5.1, riprapping. We do have a large armor rock stabilization on Quejack Creek, which is out of Cuesta Woods. So armoring the paved section of Bruno Road and then putting in some drainage ditching. 5.2, DOT is going to be doing the pavement preservation project for miles 0 to 8, and they have included a couple of culvert replacements where they'll be armoring the inlet and outlet of those culverts to reduce erosion and scour. .3, this is again about our levees. We just talked about the need to have an assessment done. We do have some information from the Army Corps on the Japanese Creek levee. We didn't meet their benefit cost specifications in order to move forward with the Army Corps to do any retrofit of the upper section of the Japanese Creek levee. But they did provide us with information about how to put the levee into kind of a national rehabilitation program. There's a lot of money that would need to happen in order to do some restoration and deferred maintenance of the levee before we would be able to put that into the rehabilitation program. So that's something for the community to keep looking at. The Army Corps basically goes with all of the vegetation that has grown up on these armor rock, and we all know how quickly spruce trees will grow, need to be removed before they would be willing to enter that into the rehabilitation program. So there's a lot of work if you've never been up the Japanese Creek levee. We are entering into a federal interest determination study for Box Canyon Creek. There's a big gravel structure. If you've ever been on the Iditarod tour at Box Canyon. Do you need to go?
I think there's a couple closer to me.
Okay, good. So hopefully in the next couple of years, the Army Corps will be working with the borough and the flood service area on armoring the Box Canyon Creek. Currently, I would call it a sacrificial berm, and hopefully we will at one point in time have a nice armored levee up there. 5.4, we have from state DNR an approved sediment management plan. We have also completed the flood depth mapping, updated our hazard mitigation mapping out in the 3 neighborhoods in Bear Creek. And we are also working on a sediment management and maintenance program. So we've been kind of working through our mappings and plans around sediment management and watershed management. 5.5 and 5.6, we've been looking with the Salmon Creek Conservation Area, kind of identifying those repetitively flooded structures. We're not to the point where we've actually prioritized anything yet, but we will be working on those. So again, once you prioritize repetitively flooded structures or critical facilities, elevating those above the base flood elevation. 5.7. So this is a really good example of a general action item. So this one could cover several different projects. Determine and implement most cost-effective and feasible mitigation action for locations with repetitive flooding, significant historical damages, or road closures. That opens up a whole lot of different types of projects. That's a beautiful example of a nice general agreement. We've already covered some of these, so this could include the roads projects that we've identified with the 7 bridges. It could include acquiring a repetitively flooded structure, replacing a road that has received historical damages, that type of thing. 5.8, we worked a very long time with state DNR to get approval for a sediment management plan out at Salmon Creek. So we now have a template in place. I have a call with DNR tomorrow. We've got a pretty good working relationship going with them as far as permitting and providing us with material sales contracts at zero expenditures to the community to remove sediment from our creeks. 5.9, once again, the flood service area has been focusing these last couple of years on a sediment management and maintenance program that's going to allow us to maintain our channel elevations to kind of a standard specification, rebuild our gravel embankments to standardized specs, and hopefully in the very near future work with one contractor for a year and renew another year and renew another year. So that maintenance program will greatly simplify the way that we do kind of the work. Those 5 sites right now are Lost Creek, Quejack Creek, Salmon Creek, Box Canyon Creek, and Sawmill Creek. And then as we kind of move forward with the Japanese Creek, work that'll be done in the next year, that might also get added to our sediment management maintenance program. I still have my hopes up that we might be able to find some sort of natural floodplain function that we don't have to do sediment management, but that might just be me wishing, I don't know. Doesn't hurt to look good. 5.11, data. It's always important to know what's going on out there. We did acquire 2 stream gauges and enter into an agreement with National Weather Service to throw those stream gauges up on hydrographs. 5.12 and ground failure 6.1. I'm going to do a little happy dance here. The infrastructure funding included $185 million to the city of Seward to complete the Army Corps of Engineers Low Canyon Water Diversion System project, fully funded, ready to go. We've been working on this since I started. I think we had a kickoff meeting for the feasibility study with the Corps back in 2015. They completed the feasibility study. We had anticipated that we'd be getting a little bit of funding for design and engineering, a little bit more funding to finalize our design and engineering, and then maybe someday we might get the funding to actually do something about our highest priority. And it's really exciting. Our congressional delegation included several different projects for Alaska, but $185 million is coming to the city of Seward for Low Canyon. We do expect the Army Corps to be doing some public presentations and information. We might offer up this work session for Army Corps to kind of give us more information about that. But basically, they are planning on building a second tunnel and a second dam upstream of the existing dam. So if you've walked all the way up Jefferson and you stand there and watch all the runners come down the mountainside during Mountain Marathon race, the dam will be further up from that existing one. Really exciting stuff, so more to come on that one. Everybody clap.
I'm worried about the mitigation upstream of that new dam. Say we
We'll
get
let them
rockfall.
figure that one out, Bob. That's why you pay the court. Ground failure 6.2, developing vegetation projects, riverine erosion damage, and restoring slope stability in landslide areas. This is why we need a landslide assessment. We haven't really developed many riverine erosion using vegetation. The Fish and Game and the Army Corps are really excited about bio-revetments. If you know anybody that has an eroding bank on a creek, I will put you in touch with the right people to look at doing a riverine erosion vegetation project. Ground failure 6.3. Low Point Road is done. I don't think that there's going to be any huge parking areas added to Low Point Road. I'm not sure that I would consider safe parking areas on Low Point Road. I don't know how other people would feel about it, but looking at the landslide assessment, I think we're going to call this one completed. Ground failure 6.4. I don't think we've done any action on this one. So this is establishing a retraining structure to prevent avalanche from disrupting the city water storage system. So the secondary dam might help. I'm not sure. Ground failure 6.5. This may need some rewording. We had several around kind of the electrical projects that I think we didn't have the right people at the table when we reviewed this last time, and we might have some rewording or changes we want to make to kind of those electrical projects. So. You can see that ground failure 6.6, again, this is some very, very specific projects. I would say that utilities is doing electrical improvement plans. They'll be prioritizing key projects every year that may or may not include some of these. Rob Montgomery did provide you with a couple of progress reports on what he knows has been done. So I know that one of those electrical infrastructure is Nash Road and they're anticipating some big work with utilities in 2023, right? Are they gonna start that this year?
Yeah, they're starting that this year right now. If you notice the cutting that's been going along those roads, and they're clearing right now for the kind of the right of ways, and then they're gonna be, they order all the supplies, and they're gonna start working on it this summer, I believe.
Tsunami, so you've heard it a couple times now, we have some updated maps, we would anticipate some mitigation action items in our review next year or sooner. Volcanoes, I can't say we've done anything really related specifically to volcanoes. Most of our severe weather action items, again, are related to utility infrastructure. So 9.1, Jason just let us know we've got those trees clearing happening, so that one is underway. 9.2, I think this one is ongoing, so developing those key projects. And funding those, of course, is always an important piece of that. Nine 3 and 9.4 were really too specific. We would suggest rewording these to basically rebuilding of old transmission lines. There is a phase 1 that's in progress this year, and kind of phase 2 would be to be determined as they prioritize additional projects. 9.5 and 9.6 have been completed. These were around radios again and weather information into dispatch. And Wildfire 10.1, again, this is around the hazardous trees, and that has been completed. And 10.2 as well. Man-made hazards, encourage the sites to meet standards and or regulations for all reportable hazard materials quantity. We did receive updated plans from the facilities that we know have reportable hazards. All right. That is the mitigation action plan review. Anybody falling asleep yet?
I am, I've been up since 3.
So, we will be spending a lot more time on this. As you can see, there's a lot of changes that need to happen, some generalization of some wording, bringing the right people to the table to help us determine what our best action items are, reviewing some plans as those get updated. Lots of work to be done around hazard mitigation planning. So, what questions, thoughts, comments do y'all have?
The ones that you're proposing to remove, what are you gonna do to remove them?
Remove,
The hazard mitigations?
yeah, this is our plan. So basically during our annual review, we're tracking changes like we did in this document. Heather was a great help in going through the plan and making changes to some of our tables and tracking the changes that was coming from the staff. And then when we get to the 5-year update, again, this is our plan. So we go ahead and we make our changes. Those get approved by the boards, by the council, and then it goes to state for review. Once state is done reviewing it, they may or may not send it back to us for some revisions, and then it goes to FEMA for approval. FEMA eventually approves the 5-year plan, and they're pretty specific about what they want included in their plans, but it doesn't have to be 333 pages.
Stephanie, I have a question. So we've talked about, riverine flooding and coastal storm surge, and is there any place in this document for stormwater? And is that even something that's considered? We've had roads, for example, this winter that were, passable.
Yeah, and I know DOT is actually addressing some of that stormwater clean out through the city in their FEMA preservation project that's coming up. It would be valuable to add any stormwater issues that we know of. We just got a report that Dairy Hill, the drainage ditching that was put in 2014, I think, wasn't performing very well right now because it's so packed with snow that their water's running down the middle of the road. I think we probably have all seen that. There's been a pretty heavy snow load this year, so stormwater drainage, ditching for snow, definitely something you could include.
How does the borough prioritize these competing communities? And how does it, how do they, once, we have ours, I'm sure Homer has theirs, and everyone else has a variety of things. How is it, we come up with, our focus, or, and then it goes to the borough and a list of priorities that moves on to the state and subsequent funding, I'm assuming. How is that broken out and, I guess, negotiated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So each of the municipalities have their own hazard mitigation plan, and then the borough's plan is for those areas outside of municipalities. So the city of Seward has a plan, and then the borough has a plan. City of Homer has their own plan. I think Kenai and Soldotna have their own plans. So we end up competing against each other in some instances for grant funding, from the state. That's possible. As far as prioritization goes, and Jason can help me with this, the city develops legislative priorities for federal and state, and those are the projects that the lobbyists go to seek funding for. And the same with the borough. The borough will develop their priorities list and submit those to the legislature. So it's kind of separate, and that's why you want a multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan. That's why you would want to have Katuchek, the city, the flood service area, all working together, because those partnership projects, then we're no longer competing with each other.
Well, this year we still got about 2 years to go before we complete our long-term mitigation on Japanese Creek. This project is on the borough list this year as number 4 and number 1 on our projects list. Okay.
All right. Anything else? Thoughts, questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time tonight. I hope you learned a little bit. You're not too bored. I'm looking forward to diving into hazard mitigation plans. I love this world, so. Well, thank you, everybody.
But then when we do have those flood events that do really happen, then you get to see a lot of these things in action, like when you have water coming over the highway or Box Canyon, like pushing out through the neighborhoods. Or like when the road washed out at Sawmill, or Fognac got down from that, it's like we have these giant flood events, and then you're like going, oh, this is when all this work comes into play. And so it is really, really important, because if you haven't been here yet for one of those major events, it's pretty amazing what the water does. And
so I'll do a little brag. So Halloween, you knew it was coming, right?
I was gonna say something, but I'll let you.
We had a huge storm event Halloween. I think Portage Glacier recorded the most rain ever recorded in the northernmost area, but in 24 hours. So the city at the airport received over 7 inches of rain. Out in Grouse Creek, the weather station received over 9, and out Rest River it was over 11. So in the weekend for Halloween, we had a huge amount of rain, and the borough incident management team was spooled up on standby, ready to go, and I had all my rain gear, and I drove around all weekend, and we didn't have anything to do. So there you go, mitigation pays off. All right, well, thanks everybody for your time tonight. It was nice to meet you. Looking forward to working with you.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, everybody online.